Our theme for this morning is about serving God and how sometimes our pride gets in the way of that. Our first lesson is part of the writings of the prophet Isaiah. Throughout the summer, we've been hearing the different servant songs included in this book, passages which describe the humility that God's servant will express. We know from our point in history that these verses were prophetic and were meant to describe Jesus. From the 53rd chapter of the book of Isaiah, verses 4 through 12. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering. Yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all like sheep have gone astray, each of us has turned to our own way. And the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. Yet who of his generation protested? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgressions of my people he was punished. He was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, though he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and to cause him to suffer. And though the Lord makes his life an offering for sin, he will see his offspring and prolong his days, and the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. After he has suffered, he will see the light of life and be satisfied. And by his knowledge, my righteous servant will justify many. He will bear their iniquities. Therefore I will give him a portion among the great, and he will divide the spoils with the strong, because he poured out his life unto death, and was numbered with the transgressors. For he bore the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors. Here ends the first lesson. Psalm 91 is a song of praise. It's a song of confidence in the midst of challenge. The writer to this psalm describes the fact that God's people face daily challenges, some of which are indeed life-threatening. But he assures the people that through it all, God is faithful and remains with them. Certainly a passage that speaks to us in difficult times or in times of illness and suffering. Psalm 91 is printed on page 258 in the front of the hymnals. Let's read the psalm responsibly. I'll read the first verse, you read the second, and so on. Psalm 91, verses 9 to 16. Because you have made the Lord your refuge, and the Most High your habitation,
there shall no evil happen to you, neither shall any plague come near your dwelling.
For he shall give his angels charge over you to keep you in all your ways.
They shall bear you in their hands, lest you dash your foot against a stone.
You shall tread upon the lion and the adder. You shall trample the young lion and the serpent under your feet.
Because he is bound to me in love, therefore will I deliver him. I will protect him because he knows my name.
He shall call upon me, and I will answer him. I am with him in trouble. I will rescue him and bring him to honor. With long life will I satisfy him and show him my salvation. In our second lesson, the writer to the Hebrews, as he has been doing for the past several weeks, writing to a Jewish audience, is writing to people who had a background in the Jewish scriptures, what we know and call the Old Testament. And so it is his intent to try and lead the people into the new covenant with God. He does so by comparing Jesus to a great high priest who offers sacrifice for the people. Last week we heard the author to this letter saying how Jesus was like us in every respect, but without sinning. Something that enables Jesus to relate to us and to understand our challenges and difficulties. In the same way here, he talks about how this high priest is obedient to God. There is a reference to Melchizedek, who in the book of Genesis is described for us as a king of Salem, or possibly king of Jerusalem. This is in the time of Abraham, where God has called Abraham, led him into this country, and then guided Abraham as he went out and conquered the surrounding lands. This Genesis passage describes an incident where Abraham is coming back after one such conquest. Melchizedek comes out and brings God's blessings to him. And so the writer to the Hebrews tells us that Jesus, our high priest, is as great in the new covenant as Melchizedek was in the old. The letter to the Hebrews, chapter 5, verses 1 through 10. Every high priest chosen from among mortals is put in charge of things pertaining to God on their behalf, to offer gifts and sacrifices for sins. He is able to deal gently with the ignorant and wayward, since he himself is subject to weakness. And because of this, he must offer sacrifice for his own sins, as well as for those of the people. And one does not presume to take this honor, but takes it only when called by God, just as Aaron was. So also Christ did not glorify himself in becoming a high priest, but he was appointed by the one who said to him, "You are my son. Today I have begotten you." As he says in another place, "You are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek." In the days of his flesh, Jesus offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears to the one who was able to save him from death. And he was heard because of his reverent submission. Although he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered. And having been made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him, having been designated by God a high priest, according to the order of Melchizedek. Here ends the second lesson. Jesus had an inner circle. 3 disciples, Peter, James, and John. And as we read the Gospels, we see that on some of the most significant occasions in Jesus' ministry, several of his miracles, and ultimately his transfiguration, it was those 3 who were there by his side. It must have been kind of special to be part of that inner group with Jesus. And you would think that being in his presence would be sufficient for them. But it wasn't. Often in the Gospels, we hear the disciples squabbling about which one of them is the best. It's a little bit like Tom and Dick Smothers' comedy routine from years ago, where one brother accuses the other of being loved most by their mother. And so it was that in today's gospel lesson, James and John approached Jesus with a rather arrogant request. They believe that Jesus is the Messiah, and that one day he will rule over Israel. And their request is that when he does, they would want to sit in the 2 greatest seats of honor on either side of his throne. This parallels another gospel story where James and John's mother comes to Jesus with that request. But in this case, Jesus tells them they're asking the wrong question. They want to enjoy his victory, but if they're willing to do that, then they must also be willing to endure his suffering and his death. He concludes by saying that it doesn't matter anyhow, it's not my place to give. God the Father will decide who sits where in the kingdom of heaven. We rise for the good news of the gospel. The gospel according to Mark, the 10th chapter, beginning at the 35th verse.
Glory to you, O Lord.
James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came forward to him and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." He said to them, "What is it you want me to do for you?" And they said to him, "Grant us to sit one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory." And Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with?" They replied, "We are able." Then Jesus said to them, "The cup that I drink, you will drink. And with the baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared." When the other 10 heard this, they began to be angry with James and John. So Jesus called them and said to them, "You know that among the Gentiles, those whom they recognize as their rulers lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them. But it is not so among you. But whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave to all. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Please be seated.